We are moving towards a cashless society, but who benefits, us or the authoritative systems that seek to control us? Hello there, you 6.5 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage to truth and freedom, or potentially authoritarian centralized systems with digital currencies that can be switched off if you don't do exactly as you're told whenever you're told it. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. Perhaps you think a cashless society is a pipe dream, something long in the making, a sci-fi fantasy that could never be induced, something that democracy could prevent, that we could bind together, band together and oppose. Well, it's already being piloted in Australia. And we know from the trucker protest that whilst digital currencies in their current form do provide alternative to centralized authoritative financial models, if we have a world currency controlled by governments, it will become a crucial component in a Chinese social credit score dystopia. Let's have a look at the pilot model that's already being implemented in Australia. And remember how Australia carried on during the pandemic.
Well, concerns are growing for senior citizens with more and more banks going cashless. Yes, banks going cashless. Over-the-counter transactions are no longer available at some Commonwealth Bank branches, with cash only available through ATMs. For more, we're joined by the Chief Operating Officer of National Seniors Australia, Chris Grice. Thanks so much for your time, Chris.
What I like about Chris is he's brought on to talk about cashless societies from the perspective of senior citizens in Australia, but he strays into all sorts of extraordinary territory. You would only get this on Australian news.
A cashless trend, what's going on?
Well, we're not only sort of seeing cash being sort of, I guess, removed from the economy, but we're seeing obviously a deliberate play to transition everybody over to digital transactions. 2030, they're removing cheques from circulation, so there's a big shift to getting people off cash. And also to get cash, they've got to pay for it as well. We're seeing more and more transaction fees being added onto their accounts if they want to access cash, in particular through ATMs that aren't necessarily provided by the big banks.
Does this remind you of the kind of behavioural nudging that took place during the pandemic? They're making it more difficult to get cash, they're charging you to access cash, and they're already eliminating cheques. These things look like incremental changes in order to create more convenience or more security, but it seems that there is an agenda being pursued that generates more profit, but more significantly forecloses on the possibility of transactions without centralised authority having the ability to intervene.
And I guess there's a lot of work that needs to happen in terms of educating and informing senior Australians in terms of being able to operate with, using their smartphones and these apps. And there's even risks around that. I mean, the organisation you're talking about that's sort of making this change, they had an outage on their app which basically lasted a day.
Presumably what's being described there is a legitimate outage that happened for technical reasons, but the simple fact is that during that 24 hours no one had access to currency. So in a society where there is no cash, there is no alternative, you could suddenly find yourself with no access to cash, no ability to alternatively transact or trade, and potentially these outages could happen at will, at whim, to individuals or whole sectors of society. Don't you increasingly get the sense these days that ideas are piloted? What happens if you tell everybody just to stay in their homes? What happens to everybody if you just deny them access to cash? If you live in a society where crisis, scarcity and denial are advantageous to systems of authority and systems of power, financial systems of power, governmental systems of power, you could find that increasingly crises are used to manage a population. All centralised systems of authority are open, yes, to flaws and inadvertent accidents and outages, but also they're open to manipulation. They can easily become tools of social control, as this example demonstrates.
So folk who were using the app, it indicated zero balance, no money in their account, and they weren't able to access their money for an entire day, basically.
So suddenly you just look at your bank account, it says there's no money there. I mean, that's plausible. Don't you have that kind of fear anyway, that at any point your bank could just go, no, we've lost all of your money, it's gone. What these schemes present is the institutionalization of systems where it is possible that overnight your money could disappear. Your ability to trade, transact, and indeed eat could be taken away from you.
And so that forced people back into the branches and long queues to just get access to what's their money.
Post-pandemic, it seems that we're being introduced more and more to situations where we're invited to tolerate more intervention and more control, more crisis. The whole goal of civilization has always been comfort, convenience, safety. Pay your taxes, we'll look after you, and look at all of the abundant products you have access to. Once that model and that paradigm starts to shake and break down, I believe it's an opportunity and a necessity, in fact, to reevaluate the whole condition of our culture. Because what we're being told now is not that things are going to get increasingly better and more convenient. We're told you're going to live in smart cities where you can only travel within a 15-minute area. We're going to have currencies that can be switched off either by accident or at will. You're going to have passports that control your movement. All of these ideas are being subtly introduced simultaneous to surveillance and censorship. In essence, freedom is being reduced and minimised and sold to us as convenience.
Yeah, it's a brave new world with a few glitches along the way. Chris, thanks so much for your insight.
Absolutely, thank you.
There's a few glitches in this brave new world, like you're starving to death in an endless queue, trying to get your hands on your own money, staring at a zero in your bank account and a husk of old bread in your other hand. That's a glitch. Also, the title of Brave New World was sarcastic and ironic. It's not aspirational. Let's go and live in the Brave New World. Those people were miserable. They lived in pods. They were imprisoned and they were on a drug that kept them all stupid. Oh.
A Commonwealth Bank spokesperson has told Today the Commonwealth Bank has created a very small number of specialist centres in major metropolitan areas which are designed to support personal and business customers with more complex banking needs. Goes on to say all of our specialist centres are in major metropolitan locations and very nearby to full-service franchises.
Do you see how they're subtly reframing the concept of what a bank is? This is a specialist centre. It's not a specialist centre. I gave you my money. Can I have it back, please? No, you'll have to go to the specialist centre and have a very special conversation. Here's a special conversation. Give me my fucking money back. Do you see how they're subtly reorganising and redefining what our relationship is with institutions that used to be regarded as a service? Suddenly you have banks that can switch off your money or don't want to look after your account for spurious and unusual reasons. They have the ability to shut down your ability to trade, and it's all described to you as a service. I'm beginning to think that there are crises that are used as opportunities to induce change, technology that is sold to you as convenient that actually offers centralised authority the ability to control, and it's all masked in bureaucratic, easy language. You have to stay very present and aware, I think, to notice what's actually happening down at the old specialist banking centre.
Their full statement is on our website, Carl.
Don't worry, there's just no cash in this bank.
No. Why does the bank need cash,
Is there a glitch in the matrix or something going on at the moment? No cash in the bank?
So.
Anyway.
I think so.
Even the news is starting to recognise that we're living in a warped time where our institutions are shifting, where their priorities are becoming apparent, where their modalities are not making sense, where the stories they're telling us can no longer mask the reality of what's happening. Authority is centralising and our ability to trade freely, speak freely, interact freely, even move around freely is being slowly inhibited. Always, of course, for some higher cause. As long as you trust these systems, there's nothing to worry about. Let's have a look at it in more detail. A petition to stop Australia from becoming a cashless society has gained more than 120,000 signatures as banks increasingly restrict customers' access to their money, which doesn't seem like what a bank should be doing. The meaning of words is continually changing. The function of institutions is changing. Compassion and kindness means that you just can't talk anymore. And now banks are an institution that prevent you from getting your money. In Australia, more than 1,600 bank branches permanently shut their doors between June 2017 and July 2022, while the remaining big four banks, Commonwealth, ANZ and NAB, have all opened cashless branches where customers are directed to ATMs for everyday banking. All big four banks have also introduced restrictions on customers sending large amounts to cryptocurrency exchanges and associated sites. You can't have your money, and neither can you set up any alternatives to these systems that we're determined to impose upon you. Authority is migrating unquestioned to new locations. When did your relationship with your bank become a relationship in which you were subjugated, where they say, oh, you can spend money here, but you can't spend money there? Perhaps it's always been like this and it's just becoming more obvious and more plain. But really, the role of a bank is supposed to be a role of service. In fact, all of these institutions are supposed to be set up to be in your service. But isn't it becoming increasingly obvious that we're becoming secondary and subjugated, subordinate to the will of some not fully revealed revealed but plainly present central authority. The bank can now take your money and control where you can spend it. You're not able to speak freely. Authoritarianism appears to be on the rise. I feel that new tyranny will not be in the form of demagogic figures that talk about nationalism, but in this creep of liberal bureaucracies that just shut down your ability to do anything without ever fully explaining it or allowing you to vote for it. We can only continue to make this high quality content with the support of our fantastic sponsors. That's the only way we can remain financially free and continue to build this movement. Like these wonderful guys. Stay to the end, I'll try and make it funny. We can't make our wonderful content or put on events like Community without our wonderful sponsors. Mudwater is a coffee alternative with 4 adaptogenic mushrooms and Ayurvedic herbs. Plus, it contains only a fraction of the stinking caffeine in a dirty old cup of coffee. So you get the energy without them terrible jitters, baby. And wouldn't you love to have the hit of coffee without that crash? Each ingredient in here was added for a purpose. So don't just put things in for a laugh. Cacao and chai for mood and a hint of caffeine. Lion's mane to support focus. Cordyceps to support physical performance. Chaga and reishi to support your immune system. And cinnamon, dirty Christmassy filth, for antioxidants. It tastes like masala chai and cacao made a really healthy lolly baby. Mudwater is Whole30 approved, thank God. 100% USDA organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, vegan and kosher certified. Mudwater donates monthly to the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics as they believe the country is in a mental health epidemic and sees psychedelics as a useful tool for individuals with depression, PTSD, anxiety and other mental health experiences. To get 15% off, go to mudwater.com/community. Use the code community15. Delicious. Australia's top 4 banks have advanced this agenda by expunging over-the-counter cash withdrawals from most branches, a move that gravely threatens the last bastions of economic privacy and individual autonomy. Online, we don't have privacy and freedom. We feel that we're being continually observed, that our data is being packaged. The more that digital technology is advancing, the more ability to control us and observe us is garnered. Everywhere you look, freedom, privacy, autonomy, and personal authority are being eroded, often in exchange for ideas like convenience. When people talked about cashless societies advancing centralized authority, it was regarded, like most things, as a conspiracy theory. But now you can see how it will be used to restrict your ability to trade freely, to shut you down. Once that meshes with the kind of scrutiny we're subject to online, it's pretty easy to see how social credit scoring can be introduced and your ability to trade, spend, move, and eat will be restricted according to the preferences of some invisible authoritative entity. A cashless society, necessary for CBDC proliferation, eradicates all scope for trade privacy. Consequently, a switch to this digital model hands unmitigated control over your personal funds to banks and government bodies. Yet the real sting in the tail lies in the unprecedented level of control CBDC implementation offers to the establishment. An intricate web of social engineering can be woven as the flow of money in society becomes tailored to specific interests. Consider a scenario where CBDCs have an expiration date, coercing consumers to accelerate their spending. Factor in the imposition of Chinese-style social credit scores creeping into the West, where unfavourable speech or belief systems incur financial penalties or account limitations. Australia's choice to pioneer the first wave of this cashless future is a clever strategic move from the establishment. Capitalising on the efficient enforcement of severe lockdown measures, the government seems ready to leverage the compliant temperament of Australians to pilot this currency overhaul. During the pandemic, when people said this will be used as a kind of piloting to introduce new social models and unprecedented levels of control, people said that was a conspiracy theory, that it was ridiculous. But haven't you noticed how frequently since then you've seen measures introduced that would have been unthinkable in the pre-pandemic era? The idea that banks could control your finance to that degree would have been ridiculous in 2018. Now it's being piloted in Australia, probably because, as it says here, Australia was compliant, tolerating those internment camps, people being arrested because they weren't wearing masks, people being arrested because they were saying the wrong thing. It seems that Australia and Canada, countries that were previously regarded as bastions of liberal democracy, are introducing authoritarian measures that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. Is it possible that these ideas will spread beyond Australia and that Australia is being used essentially to pilot financial schemes that we'll all be subject to in the next few years? A total of 130 countries, representing 98% of the global economy, are now exploring digital versions of their currencies, with almost half in advanced development, pilot or launch stages, a closely followed study shows. The global push for CBDCs comes as physical cash use falls and authorities look to fend off the threat to their money printing powers from Bitcoin and big tech firms. Every time there's been a change from gold to paper money, people are cynical about it, skeptical about it, and concerned about it. But generally, these evolutionary trends do place more power in the hands of centralized authoritative systems that are difficult to access and are not democratic. Do you remember that when cryptocurrencies were first mooted, they were largely reported on in pejorative terms, condemned because of the damage they caused to the environment, because they're unstable or dangerous? Then it became clear that they were effective and that they were here to stay. So the next phase is to control them, to prevent you accessing, as in the case of Australia, prevent you spending your money on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, till eventually the only digital currency you're allowed to use is one that they can tightly control and at will presumably switch off. In 2021, the Bank of England called on ministers to decide whether a central bank digital currency should be programmable, ultimately giving the issuer control over how it is spent by the recipient. That will be sold to us, of course, as, what's great about this currency is you can stop your children spending money on cigarettes and alcohol. But of course, we're familiar with that playbook now. This will be for your convenience. This is going to be fantastic. Once you grant them that authority, once you grant them that ability, even if optimistically we say, oh, the current government would never do that, you can conceive of a world where a more draconian government might come in and deploy these measures a little less humanely. But personally, I think we already have the institutions and elites in place that would deploy these measures in a draconian way. Tom Mutton, a director at the Bank of England, said there could be some socially beneficial outcomes from that, preventing activity which is seen to be socially harmful in some way. It's a very vague sentence and affords numerous interpretations, and that's very dangerous because ultimately I think what we want is the maximum amount of freedom, the maximum amount of ability to trade freely, the maximum amount of ability to speak freely, the maximum amount of control over our institutions, whether they're private or democratic. What the evident drift is towards the invisible creation of institutions that will be able to impose absolute control, even if that's not what they do in the first instance. Even if the first instance is just, oh, there was a glitch, it was shut for 24 hours. Down the line, it's like, we're shutting this down until this riot stops. We're shutting this down until these protests are quietened. We're having to do this because of climate change or because of this pandemic. They'll always find a reason to deploy authority once they have it. I think the only chance we have is to prevent the authority being realised in the first place. You could think of giving your children pocket money, but programming the money so that it couldn't be used for sweets. There's a whole range of things that money could do, programmable money, which we cannot do with current technology. It's quite telling that the analogy that's used is a parent allowing their children to spend money, but only in the way that they want it to be chosen. I don't want a parental relationship with the state. I want the state to be there simply for service, a bureaucratic entity that has no opinion or view on my personal or moral conduct. If we increase centralized authority for already corrupt institutions, we will obviously increase the corruption. Because of the nature of cryptocurrencies that are based on blockchain as a ledger that records every transaction, governments would have unrestricted and easy access and command and control over when and how and what people do with their money. Beyond simply keeping an ever-watchful eye over what citizens are up to, governments would also be able to decide on more radical and, in immediate terms, much more damaging moves, such as cutting people off from their money. So under certain circumstances, the government would have the ability to prevent you accessing your money. In a sense, it's not your money anymore. Remember the famous quote, some people don't notice their change because they never move. Well, look at the potential to restrict your movement that's being imposed now. As soon as you become an undesirable, the minute your own interests are opposed to the interests of the state, you can be switched off, faded out, shut down in an instant. Just because at this moment you're not an enemy of authority, it doesn't mean it can't happen at some point in the future, either because you change or authority authority changes. The world has recently learned through Canadian authorities' actions when bank accounts of participants in a civil protest were frozen that this is perfectly doable, even without centralised government-issued digital money. So it's already possible. They're already doing it. There have been recent political scandals in our country where a bank no longer wanted to serve an unfavourable customer. These, I believe, are outliers where institutions that we didn't previously see as authoritative are granted new authority. The media seems to have authority that I didn't grant it. Social media sites have an authority that we didn't collectively grant them. And now banking systems are being used as agents of control. Fascism is when financial and private interests and state interests align to the degree where ordinary people are pincered into narrow pathways of barely perceivable freedom. The only freedom you'll have is the quiet privacy of your own mind. No freedom of movement, no freedom of trade, no freedom of speech. What we are seeing now are the emergent shoots of the dystopia that we are all being invited to inhabit. But imagine if that form of currency were the only one available. There can be no outsiders now. Where once the outgroups were travellers, people that were presumed not to pay taxes or operate within our systems, what's being engineered now are systems that are so powerful that you could be regarded as an outsider just because of your political beliefs, just because you said something when you were 20 years old, just because you've made an unfavourable trade. Simply by wanting to be free, you could be regarded as an enemy of the state. The unprecedented level of financial mass surveillance itself will be almost insignificant compared to the potential damage done by replacing all other forms of currency, including fiat money and cash as one of its manifestations, say critics. This would remove private banks and physical cash as middlemen, leaving citizens alone in the room and all the money they have to their name with the state. And from that point on, they would have to trust that state implicitly and explicitly not to misuse that massive power. All this is a far cry from the original idea of decentralized cryptocurrencies, supposed to assume the role silver and gold had before the onslaught of paper money and allow for safe, protected, unrestricted and universal transactions. Even when a new technology emerges, like the internet, with its ability to unite people from across the world and create conversations and communities that would have been impossible a few decades ago, we're seeing now how that can metastasize into a system of surveillance, closing down free speech, closing down free communication, being used to monitor your every move, being used to essentially turn you into a consumer of commodities. Then cryptocurrencies emerge that provide us with avenues that permit the bypassing of centralized financial and state authority. Initially, these new technologies are condemned. They're environmentally dangerous. They're renegades. They're pirates. It's disgusting. Then over a few years, they work out, actually, we can use this to create more authority and more control. Suddenly, the language around cryptocurrencies being dangerous or bad for the environment completely disappears. They're okay now. They're not burning up too much energy. They're not dangerous. Once it can be used as a tool for centralized authority, all of the other arguments melt away. This is what happens when you're governed by people that have no real moral authority, that have no moral principles. They'll use environmental concerns to control you. They'll use financial concerns to control you. They'll use compassion for marginalized groups to control you. If the ultimate goal is continued and increasing authority, everything that goes into that machine is just fodder towards that goal. So cryptocurrencies are bad when they represent freedom, but good when they represent control. So what do you think's happening in Australia? Do you think people are being offered an opportunity to trade freely, to benefit from new technologies? Or do you think that what's happening is a pilot scheme for an eventual global currency where we will be cast in the role of children, only allowed to spend our money in the way that they want, only to speak freely, to say the things that they want us to say, only to move in areas that they want us moving in, and anytime there's dissent, anytime you step outside of their preferred pathways, your financial freedom will be closed off just like that. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments below? If you enjoyed that video, why don't you have a look at either of these? Turn on the notification bell and subscribe. And if you can, please stay free.